Before I take you back to the moment everything shifted on the Bainstead, tell me where you're reading this from in the comments. If you've ever had love sneak up on you when you least expected it, tap the like button and share this with someone who needs a little hope today. There is a peculiar foolishness to searching the horizon when what you're after has been riding silent beside you all along. Men will cross deserts and ford rivers for a thing they cannot name, believing it lives just beyond the next ridge. Elias Bain had done enough writing, fought enough storms, and swallowed enough disappointment to know the truth. Sometimes the map you need is folded inside your own saddlebag. Elias had come into Willow Hollow territory with the kind of stubborn that builds fortunes. At 34, he ran 3,000 acres of rolling grass and sage known locally as the Bainstead, a spread that fed nearly 800 heads of stock and kept a dozen hired hands busy from spring thaw to the first snowfall. Folks in Redford and Silverton spoke his name with a nod. Elias Bain, a man who paid his bills, kept his word, and expected the same. What Elias did not have, and what the town could not abide, was a wife. Agatha Pritchard, the town's official and self-appointed poetry matchmaker, took this as her personal failing. She marched up his porch one sun-faded afternoon with the energy of a woman who'd been denied the square of pie she'd been promised. "Elias Bain," she declared, tapping the rail with a gloved finger. "A man of your means shouldn't be riding out the rest of his days alone. Little feet should be running through this house. It's past time." Elias listened with his habitual patience while Agatha listed virtues of another prospect, the same way a man listens to the weather report, necessary but never able to change the sky. This round, she presented the daughter of a Helena banker, polished and precise, taught how to count both coins and compliments in equal measure. Elias had agreed to meet her. He had agreed to meet many, because in Willow Hollow, a bachelor is a civic problem, and Agatha is relentless. He had been to 5 teas, 5 dinners, 5 polite refusals. The first, Lila Forbes, smelled of starch and perfume, and glanced at the barn as though the word barn were a sin. "Couldn't you hire someone for the messy bits?" she asked, a delicate handkerchief pressed to the corner of her mouth as if to dam her disdain. The second, Hannah Kessler, a practical widow who did arithmetic like prayer, spent her dinner outlining how she planned to turn her widow's purse into railroad stock. The rest, 3 more, followed their patterns, a mismatch of tastes, priorities, and quiet rejections. The last one had been nearly a yes. Elias tasted the word on his tongue and thought it sweet until he saw her laugh on the arm of Colt Harding, his oldest friend and his most polite rival. The sight knocked. Something loose inside him, a small, private grief that he swallowed with his coffee. Fate, it seemed, liked to spit in his mug sometimes. Disappointment has a way of sharpening the eyes. It clears the fog so you can see what was always underfoot. Elias was about to learn that lesson the way a man learns a river crossing, by being carried a little downstream and then hauling himself to shore. He had taken to sitting on his front porch in the mornings, watching the day begin on the ranch. The winter pasture had taken the last of the yearlings. Hired hands were moving with practiced ease, and the air came full of the tang of cattle and cut grass. Behind him, the kitchen door creaked and someone hummed as if the house itself were breathing. Elias turned just as Mara Hale stepped out, carrying 2 steaming mugs. Mara had been with the Bainstead 4 winters now. Her first winter had come with a grief, a fever that took her husband Thomas and his handful of belongings in a single cruel season. She arrived with 2 trunks and a pragmatism that felt like a lanthorn on a dark night. "Coffee's cooling," she said, handing him the cup. Her fingers brushed his, and the heat from that brief contact spread where no coat could warm him. Mara moved through the house, as if she had been born into every corner. She knew the boards that groaned in April, the latch that stuck in autumn, the exact moment meals should appear for hungry hands. She cooked, mended, planned provisions, and kept the accounts with the precision of a ledger. She could have named the weight of a sack of grain by thumb. When she first asked for work, Elias had offered room and board plus $20 a month. She'd countered with $25 without missing a beat, and they'd struck a deal. 4 years later, Mara's presence was as essential as the beams that held the roof. Elias did not think of her in romantic terms. She was his employee, steady and competent. That was how they both kept it. Business first. Everything else filed under what if. There are certain truths men and women arrange like fragile plates, safe to look at, dangerous to touch. The sound of hooves brought Elias back to the present. 3 riders were approaching down the main road, dust trailing like a complaint. Colt Harding came first, tall and sun-browned, his grin easy as a creek. Beside him were 2 of his hands, young, eager, and already smelling of the road. "Morning, Eli," Colt called, easing up to the porch. "Coffee hot if you're staying." He tipped his hat in casual challenge. "We can't linger. Gotta move some stock at the Mercer place." Colt's practiced tone shifted. "But you heard the talk in town?" Elias wiped his mug on his pant leg, eyes narrowing. "What talk?" "The buyers, from the east. They'll ride through next month, looking to contract for spring delivery. Word is, they want premium herds and people who can keep their promises. Family men. Get a nod from city buyers. They like the stability. Wives mean roots." Colt delivered the sentence like a pebble thrown into a quiet pool. The ripples hit a truth. In cattle business, a man with a family feels anchored in a way a bachelor does not. Elias had built the Bainstead alone. His father's small herd turned into a robust operation. Each fence post, every barn beam, leaned on years of his work. Yet in Colt's words was the reminder that perception sometimes spoke louder than pedigree. "Come spring," Elias said even, letting his voice ride the wind without his usual tightness. Colt touched his hat, and the men rode on. Even as the dust settled behind them, Elias felt a restless thing inside him that Agatha's matchmaking could not sate. He found his gaze caught on Mara as she passed the doorway, the early light throwing bronze highlights through her hair. For the first time, he wondered not who Agatha would present next, but what was quietly present every morning, as coffee was poured and boots were exchanged for slippers. A week after Colt's warning, fate knocked like a traveling salesman. Evelyn Meers, daughter of a Helena banker, arrived in Willow Hollow earlier than scheduled. Agatha intercepted Elias outside town in the general store, like a woman who had tied a rope around destiny and planned to hold on tight. "She's here," Agatha announced, eyes bright. "I arranged tea tomorrow at 3. Your good suit, Elias. First impressions matter." Elias adjusted the only suit that ever dared to pretend at fashion, feeling the collar like a constraint. He was 10 minutes early as a habit. Punctuality on a ranch is measured in survival. Evelyn sat at a corner table, hands folded, posture immaculate, designed by etiquette and sewn with careful schooling. She rose as he entered, gloved hand extended. "Mr. Bain?" she asked, smile precise as a measuring cup. "Evelyn Meers." They exchanged the small talk necessary for civilized people to avoid the land between souls. Evelyn's voice was cultivated, each syllable placed like a pearl on a string. She admired his acreage and praised his success, calling his life a very fine fortune indeed. She mentioned finishing schools and parties in distant cities. She knew how to keep a straight course through conversation and how to steer it where she wished. Their afternoon moved like skilled dancers, graceful, predictable, and warming only by polite distance. She asked clever questions about cattle breeding and management that suggested genuine interest. For all intents, she might have been the wife Agatha had promised him, refined, aware of business, comfortable in a parlor and on a balcony. Elias escorted her back to town the next day, showing her the stretch of land and the barn lofts as if reading her the lines of a manual she could understand. When they arrived, Mara was on the porch in a simple brown dress, hands steady from years of work. Her welcome was quiet and unassuming. Evelyn's eyes flicked past her as though the woman were a piece of furniture, serviceable, not sentimental. Mara set out refreshments with a care that made the table feel like a shelter. Her cake was warm, her coffee strong, and she spoke little. Evelyn admired the stone hearth and the wide rooms. She suggested curtains, wallpaper, and a piano in the parlor, as if designing a stage. During a mid-afternoon commotion, a fence gone down, and a horse cut on barbed wire, Elias watched Evelyn as he marshaled hands and fixed the brake. She watched him with admiration that sharpened into something like thrill. When Colt arrived with a string of horses later, he greeted Evelyn with an easy familiarity that made Elias's chest shift. Colt's charm gleamed like a polished spur. Evelyn returned it with a light that was less ornamental than it had first seemed. They left the Bainstead later that day with Evelyn's goodbye, falling polite and certain. "Perhaps I'll visit again," she suggested. Elias, who could not tell whether he felt disappointed or oddly relieved, returned home to a house that smelled of stew and the steady, honest work of a woman who had been there through winters and tight times. Mara greeted him without fanfare. "How did it go?" she asked, pouring his cup as if that, more than anything, measured the success of a day. "Reasonable," he said, surprised at his own coolness. Mara's face was unreadable. They ate, they discussed fences and feed, and the rhythm of the house soothed him more than Evelyn's promises or Agatha's matchmaking ever could. In the quiet of that evening, with a lamp glowing and the house full of ordinary comforts, Elias realized with a slow, disorienting clarity that he longed for the kind of conversation that had nothing to do with dressmakers or dowries. He craved the companionship that pulled its weight, that fed more than appetite. News arrived soon enough that made the Evelyn matter a footnote. The Eastern buyers came like a cold wind and signed contracts with both the Bainstead and Harding spread. Elias secured the larger deal by merit. Stock quality and delivery reliability mattered more than the presence of a wife in the ledger. Agatha's wisdom about family roots had not been wrong so much as incomplete. What mattered most was substance. Autumn folded Willow Hollow into gold. The last cattle moved to winter pasture. The hay was stored. Only Amos Grady, Elias's oldest hand, and Ben Cole remained to help keep things tidy. One frost-bright evening, with a lamp circle humming over the table and the journal of breeding on his lap, Elias watched Mara at her sewing and felt a tide turn. The sight of her bent over a seam, fingers quick and sure, shifted something inside him that had been sleeping. He realized, in the same breath that the kettle sang on the stove, that the life he wanted was not a set of credentials or a parlor skill set. It was the woman who hummed in the dim, who mended shirts, who could tell the weight of a sack of oats by feel and the mood of a man by how he held his pipe. Mara had become more than a steadying hand. She'd become the marrow of the house. He asked her, in a clumsy way, what she would look for in a husband. She answered with the practicality of someone who had seen storms and tended thunder. "Kindness," she said. "Someone who treats his stock fair. Someone who stays through the bad seasons. Someone who believes the work's worth doing even when no one's watching." Elias thought about those words until they sat like coins on his tongue. He found himself admitting his own truth. "I reckon I want what you named. Someone who belongs to the life, not just the ledger." The nights that followed contained a new gravity. They grazed the perimeter of something that might be confession. Small touches became loaded. He lingered in the kitchen with ledgers open but eyes wandering. She asked his opinion on trivial things as an excuse to stay in the same room. They discovered a mutual hunger for a life that included more than the daily list of chores, futures that could be planned together. Storms, like certain truths, make themselves known whether you are ready or not. On a night when wind punched the prairie and rain drove wild, Mara and Elias labored together in the yard to save the laundry from the wind's wrath. They moved with an efficiency born of habit. The rain soaked them through. Standing on the porch, both of them wet and breathing white in the cold, Mara's hair unpinned and clung to her cheeks. She looked less like a housekeeper and more like a woman whose heart had been in hibernation long enough. "I can't keep pretending," she said at last, voice raw with the weather and something hotter. She confessed how she had thought of him in small hours, how she had woven him into the future in her mind. There were no polished words in her admission, only the raw truth of loneliness and longing. Elias heard himself answer with a truth that matched her fervor. He had been a fool to parade potential partners before a woman who had already rearranged his life by doing the dishes. In the rain, where they'd been soaked, he gathered her, and they kissed in a way that made decades of restraint turn to smoke. The storm beat on, vivid, loud, indifferent, but inside the kitchen, they kindled a different kind of warmth that would last past the gusts. Afterwards, for a few days, the house hummed with a new rhythm. They stayed close and spoke in small terms about what it would mean. Then Ben Cole brought a letter that cut between their easy smiles. Colt Harding had sent an offer to Mara, more pay, better board, and the suggestion of additional arrangements if she cared to accept them. The letter was a wedge. Mara had the right to consider any opportunity that might lift her from a precarious dependence. Elias's stomach dropped at the thought of losing her to a man who had the habit of buying what he wanted with smiles and coin. He confronted a fragile, ugly part of himself, jealousy dressed as practicality, and knew that to keep Mara, he must be both brave and honest. He asked her plainly what would make her stay. She demanded the truth. Was he proposing out of love or fear of losing what had been his? He answered both. He admitted his fear, but said also, with the kind of conviction that fires a bell, "I love you." Mara's answer was careful. She wished time to think, not to be swept by storm or proposal. She would dine with Colt and hear what he offered, but she would also want clarity from the man who had become her partner in the quiet, hard work of the Bainstead. For Elias, those days stretched. He paced the porch like a man ridding himself of his shadow. When Mara returned from her dinner with Colt, and Colt's carriage rolled away without triumph and with the light of politeness in his eyes, Mara handed Elias the brim of his hat. "You left this," she said, returning something he had misplaced months ago like it had been waiting for him. Her smile lit the porch like a lantern set free. "I thought you might need it." A hat returned can mean many things. It can be a kindness. It can be a practicality. It can also suddenly be an answer. Mara had chosen the life, not because of panic or convenience, but because she wanted to stay and be part of something she'd helped make. She demanded, as a condition of her staying, a genuine partnership. She would be involved in planning and accounts. She wanted children if fortune favored them. She wanted to be recognized as more than hands in the kitchen. Elias said yes without hesitation. They married that November in a white church by Willow Creek, beneath cottonwoods that looked like flames in the cold. The town came, some with suspicion, some with delight. Agatha wiped her eyes and proclaimed a case well made. Colt offered a stiff but sincere handshake. Friends and hired hands circled the couple with the warmth of people who have watched something steady turn to joy. Standing on the church steps, Mara and Elias felt the future stretch like open land. They had work to do, fences to mend, calves to mark, ledgers to reconcile. But they had also each other. What had been sought in other places had been lying quiet in daily routines, in the steam of a coffee mug and the mending of a shirt. Elias kept thinking of the saddlebag, a small, mundane thing that had contained the very treasure he had been hunting. The best things, he learned, are often carried unseen. Sometimes the thing you think you must travel to the horizon to find has already been riding right beside you, waiting for you to look down and recognize it. If this little tale warmed something in you, tell me where you're reading from below, city, town, or country, and drop a like if love surprised you once too. Want more stories about quiet people, doing brave things? Subscribe or follow for the next one, and share this with a friend who needs a reminder that sometimes what you need is already home.